Hello, guys.
I didn't even want to go to the event. The invitation had been sitting on our kitchen counter for almost 2 weeks, printed on thick cream-colored paper with elegant lettering that tried very hard to make the whole thing look important. Kelly kept moving it around the house like a reminder I couldn't escape. Sometimes it appeared next to my coffee mug in the morning, sometimes next to my laptop in the evening. Every time I hinted that maybe I should skip it, she gave me the same look. That calm, controlled smile she used whenever something mattered to her professionally. "It's my boss's private event," she explained again, while getting ready that evening in our bedroom. "You know how these things work. People notice who shows up. It's important for my image." Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse than that, patient, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. So I stopped arguing. The truth was, Kelly had always been better at these environments than I was. She thrived in rooms full of strangers, investors, and ambitious people trying to impress each other. I preferred quiet dinners with friends or weekends at home. But marriage means compromise. So that night I put on a suit, adjusted the tie she picked out for me, and drove with her downtown to one of those expensive Chicago hotels that look like they belong in magazines. The kind with marble floors, tall golden elevators, and a lobby that smells faintly like polished wood and expensive perfume. The event was being held in a ballroom on one of the upper floors. When we arrived, a woman at a registration table handed us name badges and directed us inside. The room was already crowded. Soft jazz music played in the background, while waiters moved through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne glasses. People in tailored suits stood in clusters discussing deals and market forecasts like it was casual conversation. Real estate executives, developers, investors, the kind of people Kelly worked with every day. And as always, she slipped into that world effortlessly. Within minutes she was smiling, shaking hands, greeting colleagues I had never met before, but who apparently already knew her. She laughed easily, touched people lightly on the arm while speaking, and listened with the kind of focused attention that made everyone feel important. Watching her in that environment, you'd think she had been born into it. I mostly played the quiet husband role. I nodded politely, shook hands, exchanged a few sentences about the Chicago market that I barely understood, and then drifted toward the edges of conversations while Kelly moved confidently from one group to another. Her boss Mason was there too. He was hard to miss. Tall, confident, always surrounded by people trying to impress him. I had met him a few times before at company dinners. He had the kind of smooth charisma that made you feel like he was constantly selling something, even when he was just talking about the weather. At one point I watched him lean down slightly while speaking to Kelly, both of them laughing about something I couldn't hear. I told myself it was normal. Work networking. Nothing more. After about 2 hours of polite conversations and expensive appetizers, I had reached my limit. My social battery was completely drained. A speech was about to start near the stage, and most of the guests were beginning to gather around the front of the room. Kelly was still talking with a group of colleagues across the ballroom. I decided not to interrupt her. Instead, I slipped quietly toward the coat area near a side hallway where guests had left their jackets earlier in the evening. The hallway was quieter than the ballroom, the sound of music fading into a distant hum. A long rack stood against the wall, filled with coats and blazers in neat rows. I immediately spotted Kelly's. Dark gray. The one she liked because, as she once joked, it made her look like someone investors take seriously. My own jacket was hanging beside it. I reached for it, already thinking about the quiet drive home and the relief of finally taking off my tie. And that's when I noticed it. At first it was just a small flash of color against the dark fabric. Something attached to the inside lining of Kelly's blazer. Curious, I pulled the jacket slightly aside. There was a badge pinned neatly to the inner pocket. Not the same kind of badge every guest was wearing tonight. Those were simple white rectangles with printed names. This one was darker, laminated, and across the top, in bold lettering, it read, VIP, upper level access. I frowned. That alone would have been strange enough. But there was something else inside the pocket. A plastic keycard. At first I assumed it was just a room key from the hotel. But when I slid it halfway out to read the printed text, I saw a label across the front. Private elevator access. For a moment, I simply stood there holding the edge of the pocket. Upper level access. Private elevator. Floors regular guests couldn't reach. Maybe it was related to the event. Maybe organizers needed it. Maybe Mason had given it to several employees. But something about the way it was tucked neatly inside her blazer made it feel intentional, prepared, like something she expected to use later. I placed the keycard back exactly where it had been and hung the blazer the same way I found it. Then I took my own jacket and returned to the ballroom. But the rest of the evening felt different. People clapped after speeches. Music got louder. Someone nearby started telling a story that made the whole group laugh. But I wasn't really hearing any of it. My mind kept returning to the badge. VIP. Upper level. Private elevator. About 30 minutes later, Kelly returned to my side, slipping her arm through mine naturally like she always did in public. "Everything okay?" she asked with a bright smile. "Yeah," I said. "Hey, quick question though." She glanced up at me. "What's up?" I kept my voice calm. "I saw a badge in your blazer. Something about VIP access upstairs." For the briefest moment, less than a second, her expression froze. Then it vanished. "Oh my God," she said, letting out a small laugh. "That? Yeah. It's nothing," she said quickly. "Just something Mason gave a few of us in case we needed to meet investors privately upstairs." "Investors?" I asked. She sighed immediately, irritation creeping into her voice. "Can you not start this right now?" "Start what?" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely. The suspicious tone. "I just asked what it was." "And I answered," she replied. "It's work-related." Then she looked at me in a way that suddenly made me feel like I had done something wrong. "You know," she added quietly, "sometimes I feel like instead of supporting my career, you're just looking for reasons to create drama." That caught me off guard. "Drama?" "Yes," she said firmly. "You're imagining things. It's a networking event, not some secret conspiracy." She shook her head with a light laugh. "Honestly, sometimes I think you're just jealous of how competitive my industry is." On the surface, her explanation sounded perfectly reasonable, professional, logical, even convincing. But something inside me had already clicked into place. Because that badge didn't look like a networking tool. It looked like a pass. A pass to somewhere spouses weren't supposed to go. And for the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just seen the first crack in something much bigger. For the rest of the evening, I barely heard anything anyone said. People were clapping after speeches. Glasses were clinking. Someone near the stage started telling a story that made half the room laugh. But all of it felt strangely distant. My mind kept drifting back to the same image. The badge inside Kelly's blazer and the elevator keycard sitting beside it. VIP. Upper level access. I tried to focus on the conversations around me, but the more I thought about it, the more a quiet discomfort settled in my chest. Not panic, not even anger, just a slow, creeping realization that something didn't quite add up. Kelly continued moving through the room like nothing was wrong. She spoke with clients, exchanged business cards, laughed at Mason's jokes. Every now and then she would glance over at me with a polite smile, the same one she used whenever she wanted to signal that everything was perfectly normal. And maybe it was. Maybe I really was overthinking it. But once a thought plants itself in your mind, it's hard to ignore. While the event continued, I found myself replaying the past few months like security footage. At first, the changes in Kelly's routine had seemed harmless. Work had always been demanding for her. Real estate deals didn't run on a predictable schedule, and sometimes she had to meet clients late in the evening. But slowly, those late evenings started happening more often. What used to be once or twice a month became once or twice a week. Then 3 times. Sometimes she would text around 8 or 9 saying she had another showing or a last-minute meeting with investors. Other nights she didn't text at all until she was already on her way home. Whenever I asked, she always had an explanation ready. Big client from out of town. Urgent closing tomorrow. Market's crazy right now. And I believed her. At least at first. The thing that bothered me later wasn't just the late nights. It was how the small details around them had started changing too. Kelly had always been careful with her phone, but recently it had become almost glued to her hand. It used to sit casually on the coffee table or kitchen counter. Now it was always face down. Notifications were muted, and at some point, without mentioning it, she had changed the passcode. I noticed it one evening when she asked me to check something on her screen while she was cooking. The code I had always known didn't work anymore. "Oh," she said quickly when I mentioned it. "Work policy. We had to update our security." It sounded reasonable enough. Still, something about how fast she grabbed the phone back stuck with me. Then there were the smaller things. Little shifts in routine that didn't seem important at the time but now felt strangely connected. Kelly had suddenly started paying more attention to her appearance on weekdays. New perfume appeared in the bathroom cabinet. Something stronger and more expensive than what she usually wore. She bought several new outfits that she described as professional upgrades, though they looked more like something you'd wear to a dinner date than a property showing. Even the gym became mandatory, as she put it, 3 evenings a week. But she always went alone. Whenever I suggested joining her, she'd smile and say the classes were already full or that it was just easier for her to go straight from work. Then there were the manicures. Kelly had never cared much about that before. Suddenly she had appointments in the middle of the week, sometimes right after work, sometimes late at night. "It's about confidence with clients," she explained once. Back then I accepted that answer. Standing in that ballroom now, I wasn't so sure. Another memory surfaced, one I had almost forgotten. About a month earlier, I had found a hotel receipt in the pocket of her coat while doing laundry. When I asked her about it, she barely glanced at the paper. "Oh, that," she said casually. "Parking and napkins. We met a client in the lobby cafe." Parking and napkins. The explanation had sounded strange even then, but I hadn't pressed the issue. I didn't want to be the suspicious husband, and maybe that was part of the problem, because once I started replaying those memories, more details kept surfacing. There was the unfamiliar name I had seen in her phone calendar once while she was showing me something. Just a first name. No last name. No description. When I asked who it was, she simply said, "New client," and changed the subject. There was also her new habit of disappearing into the bathroom with her phone. 5 minutes. Sometimes 10. She would come back calm and composed, like nothing had happened. Whenever I asked who she was texting, she would smile and say, "Work stuff." At the time, I told myself all of it was normal. Career pressure, ambition, a competitive industry. But standing there in that ballroom with the music playing and people laughing around me, the pieces started arranging themselves into a different picture. A picture where those small changes weren't random. They were adjustments, precautions, the kind someone makes when they're building a second life carefully enough that the first one doesn't collapse. Across the room, I saw Kelly again. She was standing near Mason, both of them leaning slightly toward each other while another colleague spoke. She laughed at something he said, placing her hand briefly on his arm. A completely normal gesture. The kind people make at networking events all the time. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the keycard. Upper level. Private elevator. Access regular guests didn't have. And suddenly, for the first time that night, a quiet thought crossed my mind. What if that badge wasn't for investors at all? What if it was simply a pass to somewhere she didn't want me to see? By the time the final speeches began, I wasn't really part of the event anymore. I stood near the back of the ballroom with a glass of something I hadn't touched, watching the room the way people watch a situation they suddenly don't fully understand. My eyes kept drifting toward Kelly, almost automatically. She looked completely comfortable, confident, exactly the same as she always did at these kinds of events. If someone had taken a photograph of her in that moment, standing among investors, smiling politely while someone spoke on stage, it would have looked like a perfectly normal corporate gathering. Nothing suspicious, nothing strange. But once doubt appears, it changes the way you see everything. Every laugh, every glance, every small movement starts to feel like a clue. The closing speech finally ended to a round of applause. Music started playing again, louder this time, and people began moving toward the bar and the exits. That's when I noticed something. Kelly wasn't next to the group she had been talking with a few minutes earlier. At first I assumed she had simply stepped away to grab another drink or use the restroom. That happened all the time at crowded events. But after a few minutes passed, I realized something else. Mason was gone too. The realization didn't hit me like some dramatic movie moment. It was quieter than that. More like a small internal click. A connection between two details my brain had already been circling all evening. Kelly, Mason, VIP access, upper level, private elevator. I could have ignored it. Honestly, that would have been the easier choice. I could have told myself they were having a quick work conversation somewhere quieter. I could have finished my drink, waited for Kelly to return, and driven home like nothing had happened. But once you start noticing patterns, it's hard to stop. So instead of heading toward the main elevators with the other guests, I slipped out through the side hallway I had noticed earlier near the coat rack. The hallway was mostly empty now. Muted music from the ballroom followed me for a few seconds before fading completely as the door closed behind me. The hotel corridor was quiet, the carpet thick enough to muffle footsteps. At the end of the hallway was a service staircase. I knew it was there because I had passed it earlier when I went to grab my jacket. Most guests probably never noticed it. I hesitated for a moment, not because I expected to find something specific, but because I knew that once I went upstairs, I couldn't pretend everything was normal anymore. Still, curiosity or maybe instinct pushed me forward. I opened the door and started climbing. The stairwell smelled faintly like cleaning chemicals and old concrete. Each step echoed softly against the walls, the sound bouncing upward in the quiet space. 2 floors up, a metal door led back into the hotel hallway. I pushed it open carefully. The atmosphere up here felt completely different from the busy ballroom below. Quiet, private. The lighting was softer, the corridor wider, lined with doors that clearly belonged to the hotel's premium suites. The kind of floor where wealthy guests stayed, or where very private meetings happened. I walked slowly down the hallway, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe Kelly really was meeting an investor. Maybe Mason had arranged something important up here. Maybe I was about to feel incredibly stupid. But then I saw the door. It was near the end of the corridor, slightly open, warm light spilling into the hallway. And outside that door, sitting neatly on the carpet, was a pair of shoes. Kelly's heels. I recognized them immediately. Black, pointed. The pair she bought last month after joking that she needed something powerful enough for negotiations. Next to them was another pair. Men's shoes. Expensive. Polished leather. My stomach tightened. A small table stood against the hallway wall beside the door. On it rested a familiar object. Kelly's clutch purse. The one she had brought to the event earlier that evening. Attached to the zipper was a tiny silver keychain engraved with a date. Our anniversary. For a moment I simply stood there staring at it. The hallway was silent except for the faint hum of the hotel's ventilation system. Then I heard it. At first it was just muffled movement, a shift of fabric, the creak of a mattress. Then a laugh. Kelly's laugh. Not the polite networking laugh she used at events. A different one. Looser. More int asterisk mate. A man's voice answered her, low and amused. I didn't need to open the door. I didn't need to see anything. The sounds coming from inside that room left no room for doubt about what was happening. For several seconds I stood completely still. Not angry, not even shocked. Just empty. Like my brain had decided to shut down every emotional response at once. Because when something you trusted suddenly becomes obvious, your mind sometimes protects itself by slowing everything down. I looked at the purse again. The keychain with our anniversary date caught the hallway light for a moment. Then I turned around. I didn't knock. I didn't open the door. And I definitely didn't create a scene in the hallway of a luxury hotel. Instead, I walked calmly back toward the staircase, step by step. By the time I reached the parking garage, the cold Chicago night air hit my face like a reset button. I sat in my car for a long moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel. One thought repeated quietly in my mind. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't imagination. It was reality. The drive home felt strangely quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you get after a long day, but the heavy kind that settles in when your mind is processing something it didn't expect to see. The Chicago streets were still alive with late-night traffic, neon lights reflecting off wet pavement. But inside the car, everything felt distant. My hands stayed steady on the steering wheel. That surprised me. If someone had asked me earlier that night how I would react if I ever caught my wife cheating, I probably would have imagined something dramatic. Anger, shouting, maybe even confronting the guy on the spot. Instead, I felt almost calm. Not because it didn't hurt, but because something inside me had already shifted the moment I heard those voices behind the hotel room door. When doubt disappears and the truth becomes undeniable, the brain sometimes switches into a different mode entirely. Observation, planning, control. By the time I reached our house in the suburbs, the sky was already beginning to lighten slightly over the horizon. Early morning trucks passed on the main road nearby, their engines echoing faintly through the quiet neighborhood. I sat in the driveway for a minute before getting out of the car. Our house looked exactly the same as it always had. 2 floors, soft yellow porch light, the small maple tree Kelly insisted on planting when we moved in. For years it had felt like the center of our life together. Now it felt like a building full of information I needed to review. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of coffee and wood polish lingered in the air. Everything was exactly where we had left it earlier that evening. The couch cushions neatly arranged, the kitchen counter clean, the framed photos on the wall showing vacations and birthdays that suddenly felt like scenes from someone else's life. I walked straight to the small office room near the hallway. Most of our important documents were stored there. Mortgage papers, insurance files, investment statements, things couples rarely think about until they suddenly matter. I opened the cabinet drawer and started going through the folders one by one. It wasn't emotional. It felt almost like preparing for a work meeting, checking details, confirming facts. One document in particular had always seemed like a boring formality when we signed it years ago. Now it felt extremely important. The house deed. Back then, Kelly had been dealing with debt from a failed business project she had tried before moving into real estate. Her financial situation had been complicated, so the lawyer recommended putting the house entirely in my name when we bought it. At the time, it didn't matter to either of us. We were married. What difference did it make whose name was on the paper? Now, looking down at the document again, I realized it made a very big difference. I closed the folder carefully and leaned back in the chair. The house belonged to me, legally, fully. Outside, the early morning light was starting to push through the window blinds. That's when I moved to the next step. I opened the security system panel near the hallway and changed the alarm codes. The system beeped quietly as the new numbers were entered. Then I called the alarm company and updated the contact information so that only my phone number would receive alerts. The woman on the phone asked politely if there had been a security issue. Just updating things, I told her. After that, I walked into the bedroom. Kelly's closet was still half full, exactly as she had left it earlier while getting ready for the event. Dresses hung neatly beside blazers and work outfits. Shoes lined the bottom shelf. I took a few large boxes from the storage room and started placing her belongings inside. Clothes, makeup bags, shoes, nothing thrown or damaged, just organized. By the time I finished, the boxes were stacked neatly near the front hallway. There would be no screaming match, no broken plates, no dramatic midnight confrontation, just clarity. Around 8 in the morning, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Kelly's car. I stayed in the living room. The front door opened a few seconds later. She stepped inside quietly, wearing the same dress from the event. Her hair was slightly messy, makeup faded from the long night. For a moment she looked surprised to see me sitting there. "You're up early," she said carefully. I didn't answer right away. She noticed the boxes. Her expression changed. "What's all this?" I folded my hands calmly. "You tell me." Her eyes moved from the boxes back to my face. "I don't know what you mean." "You came home late," I said evenly. "Very late." "It was a networking event," she replied quickly. Those things run long. I nodded slowly. Interesting. Her posture stiffened slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I watched her for a few seconds before answering. Kelly, if someone builds secret routes to VIP hotel floors, they usually don't expect their husband to notice. For the first time that morning, her confident expression cracked. Only slightly, but enough. Then, just like at the event earlier, she recovered quickly. This is ridiculous, she said. You're being paranoid. Am I? Yes, she snapped. You're imagining things again. I was working. That's what people do at networking events. I stayed calm, because the strange thing about certainty is that it removes the need to argue. You're right, I said quietly. She blinked, surprised. Right about what? That this conversation isn't really necessary anymore. I stood up and gestured toward the boxes by the door. You can take your things. Silence filled the room. For a long moment neither of us moved. Then I said the one thing that had become completely clear since that hotel hallway. If someone builds secret routes to private floors, Kelly, they usually left the marriage long before the truth is discovered. The silence after that sentence felt heavier than anything we had said before. Kelly stood near the front door with one hand still resting on her purse strap, staring at the boxes lined neatly along the wall. For a moment it looked like she genuinely didn't understand what she was seeing. Then the realization began to settle in. Her eyes moved slowly from the boxes to the hallway. To me. You packed my things? She asked. Her voice sounded different now, less confident. Some of them, I said calmly. This is insane, she replied almost immediately. You can't just throw me out of my own house because you're imagining some story in your head. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The normalcy of the movement seemed to irritate her even more. You're not even going to talk about this? She demanded. We already are. No, she said sharply. You're making accusations without proof. I leaned against the counter. You're right, I said. Let's talk about proof. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're assuming I acted without knowing what happened. Kelly crossed her arms. And what exactly do you think happened? I watched her carefully before answering. I think you left the ballroom with Mason. Her expression remained still. I think you used the VIP elevator access that was hidden inside your blazer. Still nothing. And I think you spent the rest of the night somewhere on the upper floors of that hotel. For a few seconds she didn't react at all. Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. An irritated one. This is unbelievable, she said, shaking her head. You've completely invented a story in your head. Did I? Yes, she snapped. You're jealous, paranoid, and now you're trying to destroy my career because you can't handle the pressure of my job. The accusation hung in the air. It was almost impressive how quickly she had turned the situation around. Suddenly, I wasn't the husband who had discovered something. I was the unstable one, the jealous one, the problem. But the strange thing about certainty is that it removes the need to argue. I already knew what I had heard in that hotel hallway. So instead of raising my voice, I simply nodded. Okay. She blinked. Okay. If that's the story you want to go with. Her confidence returned slightly. Because it's the truth. Great, I replied. Then this should be very easy to sort out. I walked into the office and returned with a folder. Kelly's eyes followed it carefully. What's that? Documentation. I placed the folder on the dining table. Inside were several things I had collected that morning. Bank statements, property documents, copies of financial accounts. Kelly looked confused. What does this have to do with anything? It means the next step is simple, I said. And what step is that? Divorce. The word landed in the room like a dropped glass. For the first time since walking into the house, she looked genuinely shaken. You're not serious. I am. You can't just decide that overnight. I didn't, I said quietly. Her expression tightened. You're overreacting. People don't end marriages because of a misunderstanding. You're right, I agreed. She opened her mouth to continue arguing, but I spoke again first. They end marriages when trust disappears. The room fell silent again. Kelly paced a few steps across the living room, running her hands through her hair. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You're destroying 10 years of marriage because you think you heard something in a hallway?" I watched her carefully. "I didn't say I heard something." She stopped walking, then slowly turned back toward me. "Then what exactly are you claiming?" I met her eyes. "That I don't need to prove anything to you anymore." For several seconds she didn't speak. Then the strategy changed. Her shoulders dropped slightly and her voice softened. "Look," she said, stepping closer. "If something looked suspicious, we can talk about it like adults. That's what we're doing." "No," she said. "You're shutting down. You're acting like I already betrayed you." I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for another document in the folder and slid it across the table. Kelly glanced down. Her expression shifted again. "What is this?" "The house deed." She frowned. "Why are you showing me that?" "Because it matters now." Her eyes moved across the page, then slowly back up to my face. "You put the house in your name," she said quietly. "You remember why?" "Yes," she replied. "Because of my old debt situation." "Exactly." The meaning settled in gradually. Kelly's posture changed. "You're not actually planning to throw me out." "I'm not throwing you out," I said calmly. "I'm asking you to leave. This is my home too." "Legally," I said, tapping the document lightly. "It isn't." The words hit harder than anything else we had said. For the first time that morning, Kelly looked genuinely uncertain. "You're serious?" she whispered. "Yes. You're going to destroy everything because you refuse to trust your own wife." I shook my head slowly. "No." She waited. I held her gaze. "I'm ending the marriage because I finally trusted what I saw." Neither of us spoke after that. The quiet stretched across the room like a line neither of us could step back across anymore. And somewhere in that silence, the conflict that would define the next several months of our lives officially began. Within weeks, the legal fight started. Kelly filed for divorce and demanded a large share of my assets, the house, savings, and investments. Her strategy was simple: paint me as a controlling husband who held her back professionally. She called friends, quietly spreading her version of events. I expected that, so I sent a short message to our closest circle explaining the truth. The affair, the hotel, and why the marriage was over. No drama, just facts and evidence. When Kelly realized the settlement wouldn't give her the financial win she expected, things escalated. Rumors about me began appearing online, and anonymous accounts started messaging people from my work. That's when Mason's wife, Lauren, contacted me. Kelly had already tried to convince her of a different story, but Lauren had proof of Mason's affairs. Messages, hotel records, everything. Together we gave the evidence to our lawyers. Once the risk of public exposure became real, Kelly's attack stopped almost immediately.
Bye bye.